Right.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Luke Renda, and today I have a special guest with me, Loralee Scaife. I mentioned Loralee in a previous video of mine, and I'm really excited to be able to talk to her today. She is an astrologer. Yes, another astrologer on my show. She does The Lord of the Rings, a myth for our time, and it's an epic 4 or 5 part series on and analyzing characters in Lord of the Rings, and it's pretty amazing. I suggest everyone check it out. And I'll put the links below, as always, in the show descriptions. How are you doing today, Loralee?
I'm doing pretty good considering, considering the state of things.
Yeah, it's pretty choppy out there right now, isn't it?
It's a wild time, boy, oh boy.
And you're in Calgary, is it?
I am, at least for now.
For now. Cool. So today we're kind of going to discuss your work, your Lord of the Rings work and stuff like that. But if you wanted to kind of sketch out a background and how you got to that point, because it's a pretty fascinating documentary series that you made, and it's really in depth as well. I was pretty impressed when I first saw it and have been wanting to talk to you ever since. I caught you on David Whitehead's channel.
Oh, yeah.
How many years ago was that?
I think that was only 2 years ago.
Yeah, crazy.
I think it was in 2020 that we did that. Yeah.
Wow. It seems like so long ago.
Everything seems like so long ago. Seems like we've gone through, millions of years in the last 2.
And when did you actually create that documentary series?
Well, I started the actual work on it in 2016. But prior to that, maybe I'll just kind of rewind and give you the story of how I got there. First of all, I started studying astrology in 1978. And initially, that was kind of in the early days of psychological astrology. Prior to that, the astrology and the books and this and that were kind of old school and more the predictive sort of stuff. And so I was never really interested in astrology at all. In fact, I was kind of dragged kicking and screaming off into astrology because I thought it was just, junk. I thought it was stupid. And like the horoscopes in the paper, right? That's all I knew about astrology. And even to this day, I think that's a lot of people just think, oh, astrology, that's the horoscope in the paper. And I also think that is by design, because astrology is such an incredible, valuable tool for self-understanding and for a psychological analysis. Of course, the forces of evil do not want us to be using these tools, because once you do, you start to have a much greater understanding of your own self, the purpose and meaning of your life, and you have a greater understanding of the personalities of other people and the differentiation of psychological types. Jung came out initially with the four types, thinking, feeling, sensation, and intuitive. But what astrology does is takes those typologies and differentiates them even further. So we have that typology mapped out in the horoscope, and then we can go down into a much finer tuning of what those sort of basic overviews of personality are all about. So when I first started with astrology, there was a fair bit of psychological input into the books that I was reading and stuff, and I started taking classes around that time, and then about a year or so after I started studying astrology, I very synchronistically came across, well, actually, someone gave me a book by Lawrence Vanderpost, Jung, A Man for Our Time. I barely knew who Jung was. You just kind of hear the name. Oh, yeah, Carl Jung, blah, blah. Didn't know anything about it, but I read that book, and that, of course, really piqued my interest. I thought, wow, who is this Jung guy? Yeah, I better look into this. And then shortly after that, Liz Green's work started coming out, and the one that really hit me was the astrology of fate, because she was bringing in Jung. She brought Jung and astrology together, and mythology. So that really put it all together for me. And then that began my deeper investigations into Carl Jung and the Neo-Jungians and all the rest of them, and of course Joseph Campbell. And all of this happened, right around the same time in the early 1980s. And then I moved to San Diego and became involved with an organization there called the Friends of Jung. And so it was an incredible opportunity to learn about Jung. And so that was kind of an intense study time for me. And, that just sort of expanded from there. And what I really started getting into more around the early 1990s was the study of the shadow. So getting really into Jung, and of course the first thing that you come to when you start investigating Jung is like, okay, what is this shadow thing? Like, what does this really mean? And that's a rabbit hole.
Yeah.
And what's interesting about studying the shadow, like, you can't do that as just an intellectual pursuit. If you start reading about the shadow, thinking about the shadow, you're going to meet the shadow. It's going to come up. And that certainly happened to me. And I have to say it was pretty scary. It's like, whoa, oh no, I don't want to deal with this. And so that experience, of course, took me deeper into the whole process of investigating what is shadow, the personal shadow, and then what is this thing we call evil? And what is the difference there? Because the superficial sort of extrapolation is, well, shadow is evil, period. If you're talking about the shadow, that's bad. Boom, end of discussion. But it's a much more complex matter than that. And what I began to learn about the shadow is that it in and of itself, it's not bad or negative, but instead the personal shadow personifies that part of the psyche that has not been allowed to be expressed. And all of this, of course, begins in childhood. We have aspects of our personality that may cause our parents and caregivers to be uncomfortable. And as children, then we get the message that, this part of me or this way I express myself and my feelings is bad. And it doesn't get my needs met. So we learn then to repress those characteristics, even if they contain within them the seeds of some of our greatest gifts. So this is the good news about the shadow, is that it's not bad, but it is this embodiment of these primitive, immature, undeveloped aspects of the self that get locked up in the dark corner of the basement of the psyche until we undergo some kinds of life experiences, usually under the influence of Saturn, because Saturn is the symbol of the shadow. So when Saturn goes to work in the horoscope, it's as if that shadow component comes up from the dark corner of the basement and starts knocking on the door of consciousness and demanding to be met with and integrated. So this process of integrating the shadow is all about looking into those primitive, immature aspects of the self that we learn to reject, because that's the feedback we get from the early environment and from the culture. I mean, the culture has a huge input into all of this shadow repression stuff. So when that investigation takes place, well, gradually you learn how to literally dialogue with these aspects of the self that are primitive and immature and sometimes frightening, because we learn to present to the world a persona of being good and nice and all the things that are validated in terms of the outer world. And so when these characteristics begin to come up, these shadow qualities, it can be quite frightening, because it's hard to own that, we have these little flaws or these little primitive components that will often motivate our behavior in ways that we don't understand. So the entire investigation of shadow is a lifetime process. It's not like oh, here comes the shadow. Oh, good, I've dealt with it now. It's all fixed. That's not the way it works. Anyway, so that journey is an ongoing journey, encountering the shadow. But then for me, after delving into all of this more at the personal level, then I began to look out into the larger world, which was not something I was ever interested in. Politics or the big world, it was like, oh yeah, that's going on. It doesn't affect me, and so I'm not going to pay attention. Well, once I started to get a better understanding of how the world, wasn't working and questioning things like why is there so much suffering? Why is it that we're supposedly doing all these great things to help people and, relieve suffering in the world and all of this? And why does it always just keep getting worse and worse and worse? So I started to, look into political dynamics and this sort of thing, and then began questioning this business of evil, which is another topic that is somewhat taboo. You start talking about evil with your average normie, they're just going to shut you right off. Like, oh, evil. Oh, no, we don't talk about that. Or they're afraid of it, And so this avoidance, this tabooness around just even talking about evil actually allows it to flourish. And the degree to which you have not integrated your personal shadow, it's as if the personal shadow, when it is repressed, leaves the door open for archetypal shadow to move in. And at that level, people can become, I would say, infected by this much more powerful archetype that I call evil, the AntiLife Force. So I had been really, deep into this through the 1990s, and of course, at the same time, getting more and more into mythology and all of Joseph Campbell's work, and both Jung and Campbell spoke about how myth is to a culture what dreams are to the individual. And I began thinking about myths and stories from that perspective, and of course was studying mostly the Greek myths, because that's what astrology is made of, is the gods and goddesses of Greek myth. And of course they're named after the Roman gods, but the Romans just kind of represented the Greek myths. And so I was thinking to myself, well, I wonder if that's true. Is myth really like the dream of a culture? And I'd been pondering that for some time. And actually, even early on in my studies, what first opened this business about myth was the Star Wars trilogy. And that was early on in my astrology, my studying of astrology. And that story really grabbed me. And I saw the characters in the Star Wars films as being archetypes of the horoscope, the planets, each of the characters representing one of the planets. So that I was really into Star Wars for quite a long time at that, but I didn't really know I didn't know enough about Jung. I hadn't discovered Joseph Campbell yet. So when I saw the film Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Rings, in December of 2001, it's like it all came together. It's like everything just kind of went boom, boom, boom. This is it. This is the myth for our time. And because what Tolkien was able to do was synthesize and concentrate the knowledge and wisdom of really, I think, thousands of years, and put it into an archetypal form that is a fit for the times we're in right now. And so that's when my research and stuff into, of course, the Lord of the Rings, and also trying to connect the story with the events that were taking place in the world. And so that study and that whole process went on from 2001 until 2009. And in 2009, I made my first presentation on the films. But that period of time from 2001 till then, I was obsessed with Lord of the Rings. It was like to the point of, okay, I've got to leave this alone. I have to deal with my life. I can't be obsessing over this all the time and ranting and raving about, oh, it's the myth for our time and it's this and that and this and that. But my friends, bless them all, encouraged me. No, you're onto something here. So keep it up. Go ahead. And so I did. And I also actually had a very powerful dream in 2007 of Gandalf. I had a dream about Gandalf. That because at that time I was like, okay, enough. I have to leave this alone. I have to concentrate on my real life, and I can't be thinking about this all the time. Gotta focus on other stuff. And then I had this dream, and my interpretation of the dream was this message of, no, you gotta do this. This is your mission. So that I kind of stepped on the gas after that, and that's kind of started the whole thing. And so it all was kind of a series of synchronicities and divine interventions, and just amazing, meeting just the right people at the right time, and like wonderful Chris Rusak, who did my video production. Um, these are the kinds of things that come together in a mysterious way. And yeah, so here we are now, and I got the 5 episodes complete. I want to do some more. I'd like to do 3 more. I have 1 already in the cooker, but so much has happened, both personally to me and in the world in the last 2 years, that it's just kind of been on the back burner. So we'll see what happened. But I feel like I got the main chunk of it done in those first 5 episodes. So that's my story.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
I was gonna say, why can't you focus all your time on Lord of the Rings and the myth of your time? You know.
Mm-hmm. Well, real life is going on.
Sorry.
Real life goes on in the meantime, and that
Right.
has become so complicated for everyone these days that just trying to concentrate is a real challenge. And I think it's true for just about anybody right now. How about you? I mean, you probably feel the same, right?
Yeah, it was pretty tough. I mean, I'd planned when I had written the Michael Mead video that I made. I wrote that 3 years ago.
Wow.
I didn't make it till like 6 months ago because I wanted to start this channel and start getting it going, right? And it just, all that stuff started happening, and I had to kind of sort of focus on my physical life and getting my garden going and getting all my stuff and supplies and prepare. And I have young children that I had to worry about protecting. And so it kind of put the stuff on a back burner for a bit for me as well. But I feel like now was the right time. It like just started coming together. My friend Martin and I had planned to do the Undiscovered Self in 2020, just before 2020. And then I had my second son, and all the stuff started happening. And it's funny that I'd read the Undiscovered Self years ago. Yeah. And I thought, wow, this like really explains our times. And then I read it about 5 years ago, and I was like, wow, it's even more relevant now. And then when we started doing our presentation, I was like, holy, like it just gets more and more relevant. Yeah. As time goes on. So
it seems to me that that many seeds have been planted over the years, but I would say especially since 2001. I mean, obviously there was the September 11th event, and that was one of the things that really struck me about the films coming out just a couple months after that, because that was so traumatic for the world, and that took place under a Saturn-Pluto opposition. And of course, as an astrologer, I'm always watching these big configurations of outer planets because they represent big changes that are occurring within the collective. And so that the exact opposition in 2001 happened in August. And September 11th, it was about 3 weeks later. So I was watching that time and thinking, okay, whoa, this is going to be, intense. Something's going to be happening somewhere. I didn't know what. But the 2 planets, Saturn, the shadow, and Pluto, the planet of transformation, metamorphosis, death for the purpose of rebirth, and they're in opposition. So after, when September 11th happened, I thought, oh my God, this is it. And so then seeing Lord of the Rings, it was like, okay, wow, here is a story, really a cultural dream that is giving us the whole picture of what we're dealing with on the inner level. And this could help us. We could become more conscious of what is taking place in the outer world if we have this deeper understanding that brings in, history and psychology and all the things that are so important now. So those seeds that kind of get planted along the way, and I think that those seeds are now sprouting because we need them to be sprouting. So the things that have been sort of below the surface and, not quite as out there as they are now are sprouting. And the event that took place astrologically in 2020 was the Saturn-Pluto conjunction. So the way these cycles work is that it starts with the conjunction. Conjunction means coming together. It's a union. So the cycle of Saturn and Pluto that came to closure in 2020 was actually started in 1982, 82 and 83. And then the halfway point of that cycle occurred in the opposition in 2001. So we saw at the opposition is the tension moment, right? And so there's this big explosion and everything that September 11th represented, and all the ramifications of that we're still dealing with. But then we come to 2020 and boom, it was almost right at the same time. The conjunction happened in January, and there followed eclipses, which are also very powerful. So there's a whole lot of stuff that took place in January of 2020. So that marked the beginning of the new Saturn-Pluto cycle, which will go on for about 38 to 40 years. So we're at the beginning now of a whole new process with Saturn and Pluto. And I like to think of the dynamics between Saturn and Pluto is boil lancing. Mm-hmm. And that is the most perfect metaphor for what happens under a Saturn-Pluto experience. Because Saturn is the shadow, Pluto is the underworld, and the imagery, if you will, of boil lancing is the toxic, poisonous stuff comes to the surface where it can be seen and felt. Because if we don't know what is happening, we can't heal. So same thing with a boil. I mean, if your body is full of poisons and toxins and it doesn't come to a head, so to speak, then you don't know it's there. So when this stuff comes to the surface and makes itself known to consciousness, then that boil has to be lanced. And it's a real messy business. It's a messy business at the physical level, but I think it's even more messy at the psychological level, because all of this, evil and dark, anti-life energy is appearing now above the surface. And it's happening on a global scale now, which really has never occurred before. We've had, wars and everything, you name it, for millennia. But it's never been to the point where the entire world is under the influence of this dark force. And because of global communications systems, we know about it, whereas we didn't before. And so this has broken through like that little seed that pops up above the ground, this new information and all that entails has broken through into the collective. And so here we are now doing this boil lancing, cleaning up this toxic stuff that was opened up or lanced in 2020. And so I like to call this period of time we're in the battle at the Black Gate. And you can't sort of take events blow by blow and compare them to the myth exact. It doesn't map on exactly, but the let's say the energetics of it can be thought of in relation to the myth. So we've had different challenges over the last 20 years or so that could compare to, say, the battle at Helm's Deep or the other skirmishes and whatnot that happened through the story of the Lord of the Rings. But where we are right now, I would say, is the great battle of our time. And we're going to be dealing with this probably for the next 3 years. And I say that because Pluto will be fully entered into Aquarius in 2025. And why that is significant is because Aquarius is the myth of Prometheus. Prometheus was the god who, out of his compassion for humans who were suffering at that time without fire, so they had no heat and no light. Prometheus then, out of his compassion, approached Zeus one day and said, "Hey, Zeus, how about we give the humans some fire? They're having a hard time down there with no heat and no light." Well, Zeus, in fear that if the humans had fire, they would become more powerful than the gods, refused. So Prometheus, being the rebel and revolutionary of the zodiac, defied Zeus, stole the sacred fire, snuck into the back door of Olympus one night, stole the sacred fire, and brought it to humanity. When Zeus discovered the theft, he was enraged at Prometheus and decided that he should be punished. And his punishment was to be chained up to a rock on a far-off mountain peak. And Zeus would send his eagle every day to chew out Prometheus' liver. During the night, the liver would grow back, and the next day, the eagle would come and chew it out again. And this was to be Prometheus' fate for eternity, until another god stepped into the scene, and this was Chiron. Chiron was the wounded healer. Chiron was the centaur god and was a wise teacher and healer. He would roam the forests with his group of chelas behind him, expounding at length on the wonder of life and the beauty of nature and the magic of herbs and healing. Then one day, Chiron was wounded by an arrow that had been dipped in the blood of the Hydra, a dragon-like creature that lived in the underworld. The poison of the Hydra was so deadly that this was a wound that would never heal. And even all of Chiron's knowledge and wisdom of herbs, healing, and magic could not heal the wound. And because he was a god, he couldn't die. So he suffered incredibly as a result of this, until one day he approached Zeus and begged that Zeus exchange his destiny for that of Prometheus. Well, Zeus, in a rare moment of compassion, agreed. And the soul of Chiron went to the underworld in place of Prometheus, and Prometheus was freed. He then went on to bring to humanity the gifts of science, mathematics, architecture, civilization. And so here we are now with this Aquarius archetype and this story of Prometheus being very strongly activated, actually starting on the winter solstice in 2020. So we had the Saturn-Pluto conjunction in January 2020, and then almost exactly on the moment of the winter solstice in 2020, there was a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Aquarius, thus awakening, lighting the torch of Prometheus, bringing that myth to the forefront, and therefore igniting the Promethean spirit within the collective. And we saw that developing over this time, culminating really in the Freedom Trucker Convoy, which was certainly surprising that it would happen in Canada, but there you go. And now it's all over the world. So the good news is this Promethean spirit is now alive and awake in the human psyche, and it will not be crushed. But because that light is now illuminating so much of the human experience, this has constellated the most negative forces, evil. And we're seeing it right now, aren't we? They want to crush that. And so they're going to come down. They are coming down hard. And I think it's going to continue for the next 3 years. And so the idea, bringing it back to Lord of the Rings, that the battle at the Black Gate, that we're in this, the Promethean spirit is also, I would say, what was at work within the fellowship. That sense of we cannot allow, evil to prevail, and this power shadow that takes over the minds of men, and where they become servants of Sauron. So this Promethean spirit now is going to continue to inspire humanity through this journey and this battle that we're all in. But we do know that evil destroys itself in the end. Evil cannot prevail because it feeds on life. It can't make anything. It doesn't create. It can only feed off of what has already been created. And at the end of the Lord of the Rings story, Sauron is defeated, but we're left then with the beginning of the new age of men. And that's, I think, where we stand too. After this battle is over, and hopefully it won't go on much longer than 3 years, but whoever's alive after this, we are going to have to build the new age of men from the ground up. So it's not a situation of, oh yeah, we're going to defeat evil and it's all going to be great and we're going to live in this, golden age paradise. I think it's going to take a little more work than that. And the battlefield that we're going to be moving through and are moving through as we speak is really the training ground and the testing our mettle to bring us to a point that would replicate the idea of kingship and queenship, which is so powerful and such a predominant theme in Lord of the Rings. So, yeah.
Super cool. I think, funny, I had a lot of things to think about there, but I feel like the truckers coming in was almost like the Rohirrim in the story.
Yes, I also compare, truckers, the people who do the real work, right? Work with their hands, the farmers, the truckers, the people who actually work, okay, are kind of like Gimli and the dwarfs.
Right.
The dwarves are the miners. and they're down in the ground digging stuff up and making beautiful things. And that is something that is often not celebrated or recognized. So to see the characteristics really of what I would associate with dwarves, and also hobbits, farming people, farmers, people who grow food, right?
Mm-hmm.
That this level, or this group of people within the society have been, well, I would say, denigrated. And as the foe have concentrated power, so the whole mechanism is to centralize and concentrate power, the ring of power, one ring to rule them all. And that's what we're seeing, this concentration of power and wealth into a very small group of so-called people. And that the rest of us are starting to notice that this is going on, and it affects the people down, lower on the pyramid, right, who don't have a lot of wealth and power, finally realizing that something's wrong. And so that ignites the Promethean spirit. You see, this idea of the Promethean spirit, it's a force of nature. It's not just a nice, happy little mythical idea.
Mm-hmm.
The myths and stories and all the planets in the zodiac represent forces of nature depicted in story form. And this Promethean spirit rises up within the human psyche when the life force is threatened. And it's threatened right now.
Mm-hmm. So
it calls this thing up and commands, really, individual people to step up, confront their own shadow, and overcome their own fears, and come together, elves, dwarves, hobbits, and men, to stand up to an evil that's coming for us all. No one is going to be exempt from this, black clouds of Mordor that are spreading over the planet right now. So we have to overcome our little internecine, squabbles to come together, just like the Fellowship did, and stand together against this force that is hell-bent on crushing us all.
I love the scene in the movies where they say, oh, can't we just hide in the Shire? And it's like, you don't get it. It's gonna spread here too. It's like, I live on a small island. Can't I just hide out here? It's like, no, it came right to my door.
Yes. Yeah.
And thinking about the Prometheus myth, it's like Chiron emancipated Prometheus. Like that Promethean spirit was emancipated. And I was just looking at some notes from another presentation, and I put in brackets, truth equals pain underneath Prometheus.
Yeah.
I thought that's also what's coming up, right? Is this painful truth that people have been, it's more painful to repress it in the long run, but they've been repressing it, and it's like it can't stay down anymore. Well, for some,
like the boil that's building up and building up.
What I was thinking about your boil lancing, and some people, I don't even notice it, with the masks or with whatever. I don't, it hasn't really affected me. It's like, how has the last 2 years not affected you? People walking around boils all over them. I don't notice them. Don't you want to lance that? No. So those are the ones that are going to suffer the most, though, is those people, right? Because they haven't been prepared.
No, no. And what keeps that going is this fear, trauma-based mind control.
Yeah.
That if you keep the people in a constant state of fear, which is certainly what's been going on for the last 2 years. I mean, it really started in 2001, after September 11th. That was their initial little test drive. Like, oh, okay, this works. Yeah, I get the people scared to death that, of whatever. And they're easier to manipulate. So they just rolled that same thing out with the COVID. And so now here we are. But it's, also been said that the truth will set you free, but first it's going to really piss you off. And isn't that the case? Like when you started learning about what's really going on, I mean, weren't you just like outraged? I certainly was.
Yeah. It's like, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore.
Yeah.
That movie Network.
Yeah.
Right.
So I guess the process now is, how do we harness that energy of anger and use it like martial arts? You recognize that, it's bad, and we've got to fight against this. But to just be roaring around in rage all the time isn't going to help.
Mm-hmm.
So we're having to really learn how to master our own anger and learn how to use that energy like a laser beam or like a martial artist. And you've trained in martial arts, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have.
Yeah. So maybe you could say a bit about that, and how maybe your own training in martial arts has helped you manage the emotional end of this. Because I think a lot of people, when they feel that rage come up, that's scary. And so it's like, whoa, I don't want to be angry all the time. So I'm just going to shut all that down. And I'm not going to pay attention anymore to what goes on, that causes that sort of denial. I'm going to stick my head in the sand, wear the mask, take the shots, obey, and maybe it'll all go away.
Well, it's like a shutting down, like you just shut down, you tune out rather than do something about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, Michael Tessarian, he uses like the red flame of anger as like blind
rage. I love that.
And the blue flame of anger, which was like a motivating, constructive anger.
Yes. Yeah.
Exactly. And there's like even old Buddhist texts and stuff that talk about like the sword of truth, right? Like burns with that blue flame. And yeah, it's tough. I have been kind of into this stuff for a long time. So the anger phase for me, although I have a lot of like shadow work to deal with, and a lot of like rage and stuff from like my childhood and growing up. As far as these types of subjects go, I've kind of come to terms with where we are at.
Yeah.
And where we need to go, right? We need to kind of again start shoring ourselves up as individuals.
Yeah.
And dealing with that shadow work, like it shows it in the movies really well, where like any piece of that like shadow that hasn't been dealt with just grows and grows so much for that dark force to feed on, right? And then the whole fellowship becomes compromised because of one person's swept their problems under the rug kind of thing.
Yeah.
And martial arts really helps because it's like you're exercising, you're getting that physical exercise, but you're also like exorcising something, right?
Yeah.
Kind of gives you a channel for that and a release. It's like a pressure release valve. At least for me, it was. I haven't been able to train that much in the past 2 years. So,
well, even just, thinking about it. I mean, I've never trained in martial arts. I wish I had. But when I started working on the warrior archetype, I spent a lot of time looking into martial arts and actually watching, hours of video of people doing martial arts. And so I kind of was getting it, vicariously thinking about, okay, here is a method and it is warrior training. And how can we apply that same method or idea and philosophy, the ideas and philosophy that underpins martial arts, and apply that psychologically? So we can take these different tools and techniques and apply them to what we need to do now as individuals and collectively into a way that's applicable for us now, because not everyone is going to go be a black belt, but we can sure learn something from the whole training process. And people like David Whitehead, and you've done some martial arts, and there's a lot of people out there now who are either martial artists themselves or have done and use those methods in a psychological capacity.
I'm going to be contacting David about a martial arts philosophy episode.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I haven't contacted him yet, but I'm going to do it. I was
do it.
Ducks in a row, but
Mm-hmm.
Hickson Gracie, he's one of the sort of grandmasters of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
Oh.
And he has a saying, and it's, fear will not keep you from death, but it will keep you from truly living your life.
Yes.
Right. So it's like everyone's going to die. And even if you're like the most afraid person ever, but it's like, you will not actually taste life if you don't conquer your fears and go out and actually live it.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like martial arts philosophy is full of gems like that. Like you could make a never ending show on martial arts philosophy.
Yeah, you really could. Yeah, you really could. Well, and the idea that, death, okay, that's a big taboo area too. Nobody wants to talk about death. So death or evil, can't talk about those. It's too upsetting. And so anything that is not allowed to be expressed and to be put out there to observe and study and look at becomes repressed, and then motivates our behavior in ways that we don't understand. And so just the whole business of death is so taboo and so scary for most people. It's like death is the worst thing. And I would say that no, death is not the worst thing that can happen. What's far worse than that is being forced to live as a slave, because that's the absence of life, especially if you're being enslaved by this force of evil that is seeking to dominate and destroy all that is green and good in this world. So even just thinking about death is something that we all should contemplate. Like, why is it so scary when in nature it's going on all around us all the time? Mm-hmm. These cycles of death.
Death isn't the end. It's a death and it's a rebirth. It's a cycle of life, right?
Yeah.
There's this book I read growing up. It's called Hagakure. It's the book of the Way of the Samurai. And it was written, this guy was born in 1601, and it was probably written in about 1660 or something like that, when he was an older man. Mm-hmm. But in the 1600s, so from about 1535 or even before that, all of the 1500s to 1600s was war in Japan. So every person born he was a third or fourth generation warrior. But he was born in peacetime. And so all of his philosophy is kind of going into this book. And it's not like he is speaking to a young scribe and the scribe is recording it. So at the beginning of the
Wow.
book, it's like, this is not a well thought out philosophy. It's just like sayings from one man. But because he was trained by warriors, and then now he's living in peacetime, so he kind of had to refine his style. You know, you're not going around chopping heads off and stuff, even though that still happened with the like the committing of seppuku. You kill yourself and then the other guy would chop your head off.
Wow.
But he has a lot of these sayings in that book are like, he's like every night he's like, meditate upon your death. He's like, imagine yourself being stabbed by spears, shot by arrows, chopped by swords, being torn asunder by a great wave. And it's like all of these things. He's like, because when you go to face your death, you will not be afraid. You will charge headlong into that battle.
Yeah.
Right? You won't second guess yourself because you spent that time preparing.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, and if you are like that, you're most likely going to come out of the battle all right. It's the people who go in afraid that don't make it.
Right.
And it's like a couple hundred pages of stuff just like this, and it's absolutely amazing. I think I'm pretty sure David Whitehead's read that one too, and
probably
love to talk about it with him.
Yeah, that's so important, that contemplation. And again, I think part of the psychological warfare that has been perpetrated upon us is to instill this terror of death. And I think there's, to a large degree, that's what has contributed to our current situation. They've been able to use this fear of death to get people to comply with these so-called remedies that are going to prevent death. Like, you need to avoid death at all costs.
Yeah.
Even if the cure is worse than the disease, and the avoidance of pain, the whole medical model is all about getting rid of pain and preventing death, which is impossible. Yeah. So it's already a joke. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Well, a lot of movies focus on this too, like eternal life and that type of stuff. Like by negating death, you negate life in a way. It's like you kind of push everyone into the middle. It's the same with the psychotropic drugs, right? It's like you have these highs and these lows. Well, then they just put you right in the middle, right? So it's like you're not even experiencing life really.
You're not even alive, really.
Not even alive. It's so wild, eh?
Yeah. But the good news is it's so obvious now that you almost have to work real hard to keep your head in the sand at this point.
These people are working overtime, I swear.
So my sense is that there is going to be a lot more awakening in the next 3 years, and that even, those who are just really trying to keep it repressed and carry on with so-called normal life that is already gone. We will not be going back to whatever was considered normal life in, say, 2019.
Oh, I hope not. God.
Yeah.
Can't stand it anymore.
Yeah, but I think this is part of that manipulation, is this idea. It's like, just hang on a few more, 2 weeks to flatten the curve.
If you just keep jumping through the hoops, eventually it'll get back to normal. Even if you won't be the same human being you once were.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it's absolutely amazing.
So that's the journey, the battle at the Black Gate, and then what comes after is we will rebuild this world in the form of a new age of men.
What's so interesting too is it's like the timing is right now.
Yep.
About 10 or maybe even 15 years ago, there was we had these transition community meetings here, and sort of like these community meetings where we're trying to kind of do our own thing and be more of a community.
Yeah.
And I brought up, let's watch, get documentary and education groups together. And, and farming groups and all this, and like
Yeah.
no one was really ready for it.
Yeah.
And now I have people in their 50s and 60s approaching me saying all the things that I had said like 10 or 15 years ago. They're like, oh, we should do
Wow.
this. We should do
Great.
this. And I'm like,
Yeah.
yes, the timing is right now. Like I couldn't have begged them to do it before.
I
And now
know.
they're coming up and like just doing it on their own. And so it's like,
Yeah.
there were those of us who kind of got it before and who had that
Yeah.
spark, but we were
Planted
very
the
few and
seed.
far between. And now it's like more and more people are coming on board with this.
Yeah. Yeah. Those seeds are sprouting, and that cannot be destroyed.
Yeah, and Jung says like the psychic dominance is changing, right? Like the
Mhm.
psychic dominance and a metamorphosis of the gods is happening.
Mhm. Mhm.
And maybe it's a good time I can share that Liz Green quote here.
Yeah. Mhm.
See if I can figure it out now that I'm actually doing it. Oh, geez.
Oh,
Ah,
there we go.
there we go. The correlation between the precession of the equinoxes and the changing era of man's development appear to be symbolically valid, even if we do not yet know the laws governing the enigma. This correlation is inescapable if one studies history, and
That's right.
particularly the development of religion and myth throughout history, since it is man's religious symbols that express most clearly the energies at work from age to age.
Mhm.
At the close of an era, many old gods die or are subordinated, and new gods, gods who are symbolic of energies which have not yet emerged into human consciousness before, are born.
Wow.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
When I read that, I thought of you.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there's the Lord of the Rings, right? Here is this myth that has come in at this time in human history. Even though, I mean, the books were written, I think they were published in 1953.
Mm-hmm.
And the second most read book next to the Bible.
Yeah.
So even then, right? And that many people reading those books from that time, again, like planted seeds, laid some kind of a foundation there. And then when the films came onto the scene at exactly the right time, i.e., right after September 11th, that just blew the doors open. Like, oh, okay, here's the story that has been brewing below the surface like a great dream. And right at the perfect moment, it explodes into the collective.
Mm-hmm.
It would be interesting to know just how many people on Earth have seen those films. Because of the way things are now, a lot of, especially younger people, I don't think they even read books anymore. But a film series like that, because the story itself was so powerful, but also the newer technology and filmmaking and stuff, like the way they created the Gollum character, like that was all kind of new too.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I'm not a big movie person, actually. I don't hardly ever go to movies. But those films were so impactful because of the time they appeared and the technology, the CGI, and all the other stuff that they were able to do, made that be like a dream. It was like watching
Mm-hmm.
a dream. And that was one of the things that really impacted me seeing the films. It is the dream-like quality of the imagery, which, like I say, I don't go to a lot of movies, so maybe there's some movies that have that. I don't think so, but anyway.
There are some, but it's few and far between.
Well, the mythic, you see, is
Yeah.
what brings even more to it. There's good stories, there's good stories that have come along the way, but are they universal myths that would apply to all people, but particularly Western civilization?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting too, like Lord of the Rings was written like after World War II, and it like came out when people were like just getting over being traumatized, basically.
Yeah.
And then and 9/11, people are just getting over being traumatized. And so it's like it almost had more of an impact because of that traumatic like residue that was there, and he did such a good job with the movies. Like I hear sometimes I'll hear people who are really big fans of the books complain about like the characters and sort of their divisiveness, or like, like say Boromir and Aragorn, these two male figures, in the books, they kind of get along a bit more, and Boromir is not as like, he isn't so much like haunted by his shadow and this and that, but it's like in the movies, it's kind of like when you first learn martial arts, you really exaggerate the movements to like eventually to learn them. And then it becomes like, when you're punching and boxing, you don't faint as much. You're not moving your hands as much. Whereas like with these movies, it's like in order to get these archetypes right and sort of separate them out, so not like everyone is sort of the same character going over the same sort of hero's journey. It's like they had to exaggerate the flaws in those characters to really impress it upon the viewer. And they just did such an amazing job. Like when I was just going through screenshots the other day and looking at a lot of them, and it's like, wow, they really just nailed the visual aspects of this movie.
I mean, right down to the costumes, the symbols on the costumes. Incredible.
Well, some people, they spent like 10, 12 hours getting into costumes. Half a day to just get dressed up to do, a half an hour scene or whatever.
That's right.
And so the production value and stuff, and I would actually really like to look into, because Peter Jackson's wife and a friend of hers. So it was interesting. It was like written by two women and directed by a man. There's that man-woman sort of combination always comes together in a really neat way, like the Rider-Waite deck of the tarot. A woman artist, a man sort of compiled it and wrote the stuff about it. But I'd really like to see like if there's something about her process and like what happened to her while she was writing the book. That would be something fascinating to get into.
Yeah, and just thinking about the time too, that when Tolkien wrote the original series, I mean, it's the mid, early actually 1950s, and we didn't have the level of psychological understanding then. I mean, he was a mid, 20th century man, without the benefit of the understanding, first of all, of female psychology. And so there's not very many female characters, right? There's just Eowyn, Arwen, and Galadriel. Whereas the male characters, there's lots of differentiation in the depiction of the masculine psyche through all those different characters. But what we have now, though, is the benefit of a much deeper understanding of female psychology, much of which has been brought forth, I would say, by Michael Tsarian. His female Illuminati material, and just, over the time that he's been, working a great deal of deeper understanding into female psychology.
Dragon Mother too.
Yes, the Dragon Mother. Yeah.
That guy is so crazy, with because he kind of takes this and he just a subject, it could be like a sentence, and he just goes so deep on everything.
I know. Right? Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
the female characters, like even though there aren't that many in the books he does a really good job of like when they are there.
yeah.
Like with Eowyn, she only has maybe like a couple paragraphs where she's
Mhm.
there, but he really you know that character even though there's not too much of her
Yeah,
in
you
the
can
stories,
feel
right?
into her process.
But yeah, the movies really take that mother maiden crone kind of
Yes, they do.
and
And
really
one of the
boil it down.
main things too, comparing the books to the films, and I think this is, uh, whether they did it consciously or not, the script writers, his wife, and I forget the other woman's name, but I think that their input was really important in depicting the female characters, but especially Eowyn. And what really fit there for me was originally the dream of the great wave in the books was attributed to Faramir.
Right.
But in the films, they give that dream to Eowyn. And
Right.
I found that to be extremely powerful and relevant to female psychology and also to the story itself, obviously. But it's such a powerful dream, a dream within a myth, right? Um, and it deals with not only her stage of development. So in the films, she looks to be, yeah, I don't know, maybe 20-ish. But I think that what she actually represents is a woman who, well, a girl who has just become a woman. I think her character and that dream she has, it relates to the transition that takes place when a girl has her first menses. The time of your first period is a major transformation. Childhood is over at that point. It's done. You can no longer be a child anymore when you become capable of being a bearer of life. And that, I think, is something that is also not addressed in our culture. Um, but for a young woman to undergo that transition is it's a responsibility. It's like, okay, I'm not a child anymore, and my body is now able to bring forth life, and so I have to be responsible for that whole process, and then potentially responsible for a child that might come through my body. And that is such a powerful thing. And in the dream, she sees a great wave. So what is the great wave? Well, it could be this recognition of the flow of the blood, the life force of the universe now moving through your own body. So that there's that aspect in terms of the image of the dream. But then it is also a message to her uh, about her vocatio. She says, I dreamed a great wave rose over the hills and green lands. I stood upon the brink. The abyss at my feet was utterly dark. A light shone behind me, but I could not turn. I could only stand there, waiting. Wow. So that's both a message that you're a woman now, you can bear life. And what are one of the most important things in terms of female development, female psychology, is the process of waiting when you become pregnant, because you are in a place where you have to surrender to a process of nature. And that means you have to learn to wait and trust that this child is going to get born when the time is right, and that's it, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So it's learning for a woman, delayed gratification, learning about how to engage with nature, to be a part of nature, and surrender your will to that process. So that's kind of the personal message to Eowyn through that dream. But then beyond that, there's also this prophetic kind of aspect to it, that indeed she was seeing what was to come, that there was going to be a dissolution, because the wave, symbolism of waves in dreams or myth is associated with the solutio process of alchemy. And that is dissolution, the dissolving of whatever forms have been there, and the dissolving of all of that in order to bring forth a new kind of order. And Eowyn, standing on the edge of the abyss, there's a sense that she's waiting for further directions, I guess. And but there's a light behind her. She can't turn around to see it yet, but the light is supporting her, you could say. And then what happens immediately after that in that scene? So she has the dream. Aragorn, she tells Aragorn the dream, and then she goes back to sleep, and Aragorn goes outside there, and where Legolas is standing there, and Legolas says, the stars are veiled. Something moves in the east, a sleepless malice. The eye of the enemy is moving. And that's when it comes in, and Pippin is playing around with the Palantir. So,
Right.
but that's an amazing scene as well. And I think it applies to where we are now. In a way, the stars are veiled. The light that, comes to us from the life force of the universe is being veiled. This is part of that, the way the forces of evil have been able to dominate us is by gradually, really over millennia, but they've really stepped on the gas in the last couple of years to cut us off from the life-giving force of the universe, the light. And as the black clouds of Mordor begin to sweep across the planet, that's what keeps us in that darkness, and therefore susceptible to the effects of this evil. And in the Lord of the Rings, of course, they talk about the black clouds of Mordor are rolled out in order to protect the orc army, right? Because they don't like to travel in the light. So you veil the entire world with this constant trauma-based mind control and keep people locked into this state of fear constantly. And then that allows the orc army to move in
Well, it's really interesting too with like a young woman when she goes through her first period and her first transformation. It
Yeah.
almost like triggers them, like they're more online with the natural processes than say like a young boy at the same age would be.
Yeah.
Because but now like we've almost taken that from them too, right? And it's like, and boys
Yeah.
got to kind of catch up to women, and then when they first, like have sex, it's
Yeah.
now that guy is no longer the same as he was before. It's like once you do this, you will never be the same as you were before, because it's opened
Yep.
up a whole new world to you, right? But
Yes.
for women, that happens early. But now they're doing things like hormone suppressors,
I know.
puberty suppressors. Oh, you can take this, you won't even have a period.
Yeah.
I mean, we could just go on and on. It's just
Oh
like,
yeah.
it's so wild. But
Yeah.
with
That's
that,
orcification.
yeah, orcification. And I feel like for about 100 years, it's been kind of slowly unfolding.
Yeah.
Although does go back further, obviously, we both know that. But for the
Mhm.
last 100 years, there's been so much death and destruction, and this veiling of the natural
Yes.
processes with, like, say, materialism versus idealism, or
Yeah.
say natural sciences, where it was like natural sciences were studying the laws of nature,
Right.
right? It's we're going to study nature and figure out how it works, rather
Yeah.
than we're going to create our own laws and change nature to fit how we want it to go. That's completely different,
Control nature.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
control nature, not figure out how it works and then use the laws that we've discovered to our benefit,
Right.
which is like the Prometheus. Like that's what
Yeah.
Prometheus does. He just like gives them the truth of how nature works,
Mm-hmm.
how fire works, how whatever, planting
Mm-hmm.
seeds, all the
Mm-hmm.
sciences, right?
Yeah. And technology.
And technology. But
Mm-hmm.
with like this veiling, it's interesting in the books. They do it in the movies, but it's not like emphasized as much. At
Mm-hmm.
at the darkest moments, the Venus, the star, will kind of like the clouds will, and the light of Venus will shine on them, and they'll look up and be like, oh, even though we're in
Mm-hmm.
despair, it's not that bad, because that star kind of gives them hope, right?
Yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
that's where we're at, where like the clouds have sort of cleared a bit. We've got a little bit of glimmer of hope.
Mm-hmm. Well,
And
and it's the ability to actually look for the light. Um, that's essential as a part of the awakening. You have to reach for it. It's like you say, if you're looking at a cloudy sky, um, if you're looking for the stars or the moon, um, then your sight is out there looking for that light. But if you don't do that, then all the clouds are just there, and it all looks dark. So we have to reach for the light and make like call it in, and it's there, but it's crawling out of this trauma-based mind control and all this fear that has been perpetrated on us, that has broken down really our human ability to get control of our fear and reach for the light anyway, you know?
Mhm.
Um,
that's the
so
like
yeah.
that's like the lesson of the Fellowship. Each
Mhm.
character that survives does that.
Yeah.
And even like, Denethor, Faramir's father,
Yeah.
um, Philosophy Cat, she did an analysis of Lord of the Rings a while ago, but she calls him
Mhm.
Denethor the Black Pilled,
Yeah.
because
That's
he
right. That's
yeah,
good. Yeah.
he goes out and he sees like all the armies, and he's like, oh, my all is lost and blah
Yeah.
blah, and he's just like, he can't focus on anything positive ever. And
Mhm.
eventually Gandalf knocks him out, gets him out of there. But like the Battle of the Black Gate that comes after,
Mhm.
they go out completely on faith
Yes.
and trust. They're like,
Yep.
we're going out and we're just trusting that we're going to distract for Frodo to get that ring. to where it needs to go. And it's like, and they don't know what's happening. They just go out and say, this is like, all we can do is fight and make a stand here and trust the hope that something's going to happen. Right. And that's where we're kind of at, is like, we got to have this faith in life right now.
Yes, we do. That's exactly right. And I love that scene before they go out to the battle where, Aragorn is saying, well, we probably can't save ourselves, but we can create a distraction that could allow Frodo to finish the job. And Gimli says, certainty of death, small chance of success. What are we waiting for?
Yeah.
There's the true warrior spirit. Right?
He's like the man's man of the group.
And that warrior spirit, I'm probably going to die. I mean, all odds are against them, right? I mean, it's just like so huge, the armies and the dark forces, but off they go. Yeah.
Trust in the hope. It's interesting. We'll have to go in and maybe like do a whole film analysis and go through maybe some scenes from the movie sometime, if you're willing to do that.
Oh yeah, that would be awesome.
That'd be cool, just to get screenshots and like go through scenes, just do a full film analysis. That'd be fun, I think.
Yeah.
But Becca Tarnas, in her book Journey to the Imaginal Realm, she brings up when Frodo brings the ring into Mount Doom, that the eye is always looking externally. Always externally looking for something else, something outside of itself.
Yeah.
At that moment, it has to look within, and it has to look within that mountain. And when it looks within, that's what destroys it, really. Like at that point, it had to look at itself. And
wow, that's a really good point.
Isn't that cool?
Definitely.
Yeah, so it's like that force to face its own shadow in a way, right?
Yeah. Because it evil has no in. There is no in.
There's
no. Yeah.
There's no, like you say, it doesn't create anything of its own. It only feeds off of that which is already created, right? It's the same, like the white and black magic. That's what they always say. Like black magic is just inverted white magic. There is no black magic. It just subverts the other form,
Yeah, like using what is good and beautiful and a benefit, and twisting it entirely around, to the other side. Like, just like technology. Technology itself isn't bad or evil. It's who and what is using that technology against us in this case. And if this foe were to be defeated, then part of what we could bring forth in the new age of men is using technology for the benefit of life and humanity. And I mean, that's been going on already for decades. Free energy technology, all the inventions, all of these things that have been suppressed and people murdered over their inventions, whether it's in technology or health. All of these things. As I've been studying this over, 30 years, and these things are rolled out all the time. Hey, look, we can do this, we can do that. And then, no, because it's all being controlled at the top of the pyramid, one ring to rule them all. They've got it all. They've got all the good new tech, but they're not going to let us have it.
No,
because that's like Zeus giving Prometheus the fire. So can't let those humans have the modern extrapolation of the gift of fire. But they've got it, and they're using it against us.
Mm-hmm.
So we are going to have to revisit these technologies, and bring them forward, for our own benefit, working together with people that we know, or small communities on the ground. We can start to develop these technologies for what's being called free energy.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of people using like different types of technology. Walter Russell
Yes.
type of philosophy. There's those Geet motors that, like, once you get it to a certain state, you can pour water into it, you can pour coffee into it, you can pee in it, and once it's going, it just stays going. So it's like you can set yourself up with generators that run perpetually. And the guy that invented that Geet motor, he put it out there, and guess where? Oh, he's mentally unstable and in an insane asylum.
Oh my God.
Right? And it's like happened when it happens in the past, you think, oh yeah, well, people were, not as understanding then, or didn't know as much then. Well, when it's happening now, there's no way to turn that blind eye. You just have to, you're just lying to yourself. Oh, well, I can't believe that happens.
Yeah.
It must not work. Like, I know lots of people who use these motors.
Oh, wow. Great.
Alchemical processes and stuff like that to get it to like plasma state. Like, the science is kind of lost on me. I've done some work on it, but now thinking about this myth of Prometheus, it's like Chiron, the wounded healer, the shaman.
Yeah.
It's his job to sort of emancipate Prometheus and get that stuff out there for us, right? The fire from the gods. And that's like sort of what I've been seeing, is that the people who have planted the seeds earlier are now starting to tend those saplings and planting other seeds. And people are like I said, with 10 years ago, people weren't ready for what I had to say. Well, now they are.
Yeah.
Right. And so everything's kind of coming together, and perhaps, it was a dark and lonely time going into this stuff before. I'm sure, you'd be talking about, oh, that's so negative. Even my friend Martin, he had a presentation, 2020 visions back, 2017, 2016. Everyone's like, oh, Martin, you're so depressing.
Yeah.
And then as soon as all the stuff happens, they're like, oh, remember when Martin was saying that stuff? Maybe I should maybe you should have listened to him. But people aren't ready when they're in that sort of naive state, and I think now they are. Like, now's the time for us to seize that opportunity. It's like taking something bad then and transmuting it.
Well, right? And that's what Chiron represents. You cannot have the light unless you've tended the wound. That's why Chiron is the wounded healer. And it's a wound that never heals. This is the real important part. Because again, our culture and this entrainment that we've been under is based on, okay, you have a wound, you heal it, and then you're done. Don't have to think about that anymore. And of course, that's applied in the medical system, right? We'll give you a pill, it'll be gone, and you just move on. You don't think about it anymore. That's antidepressants, for example.
Except for all those side effects, you're gonna have to take more pills for them. But
but that's okay, because the wound, you don't have to bother with the wound anymore. And so the whole dynamic of this wounded healer archetype is that it is in the tending of the wound that wisdom flows. We don't get to wisdom until we have tended our own wounds. And that also, another way of saying that is tending to the shadow, because that's where the wounds are, is in that shadow part of the psyche. And generally it comes from childhood. We literally inherit the wounds of our ancestors. So just as we inherit biological similarities to our parents and our family background, our ancestors, we also inherit emotional and psychological propensities to certain kinds of behavior. And if that is not brought to consciousness, it just gets rolled on from generation to generation. It plays itself out in the family system psychology. And usually there will be, one of the children, maybe two, depending on how many kids you have, that will carry the family shadow. And once that has been brought to consciousness through the inner work of one who has been called upon by the force of their fate to carry that family or ancestral shadow, once they bring that to consciousness, then healing takes place. And that's where wisdom begins to form. You become more wise about yourself and about, oh yeah, geez, I'm dealing with this because my parents couldn't deal with it. They didn't have the tools, they didn't have the psychological support, they didn't have therapy, and so they were just bumbling along doing the best they could. And it's our generation, or I would say everyone, coming in after World War II. So people being born late 1940s, and then of course people born in the 50s and growing up in the 1960s, cultural revolution, which, by the way, involved a Saturn-Pluto. There was a Pluto-Uranus conjunction in Virgo, and Saturn then opposed both of those two potent energies. That's what was going on in the 1960s. And so there was that big eruption. And of course, the foe moved in and infiltrated that and really, to some extent, brought it down.
Subverted it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And as I've heard it said that, a lot of the hippies and that, were sort of at the forefront of the 1960s movements, they all became stockbrokers.
Yeah.
So, so much for the, we're against the man, and then they just get rolled in and they become just like what they were fighting against.
They're all the ones, like my candle just relit as you were speaking.
Oh, really?
Yeah, back there.
Oh, well.
They're all the ones that are yelling at you to wear a mask or to take your orc shot.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's like, what? Didn't you fight? Imagine like, if the Vietnam War was happening and protesters of the Vietnam War were saying, hey, we got to stop this. But what does it matter to you? How's it affected your life?
Mm-hmm.
That's what people say to you now with this.
Yeah.
It's absolutely appalling.
I know. Yep.
But going back to that wound tending, that's like Aragorn's character.
Yeah.
He has this ancestral wound.
He does.
And he is the one who's tending it, and that he's getting that wisdom from it. And he has help, and he's focusing on that shadow side of his family line.
Yeah.
Isn't that so deep? And it's so wild. Yeah. And that movie does such an amazing, an amazing way of just bringing that out, just in like the symbolism and in the visuals.
Yeah.
It's not really even spoken about. It is a bit, but it's like the symbols, you really see what's happening, with Aragorn picks up that broken sword, and there's that picture in the background, and it's literally the picture of his ancestor dealing with the shadow issue. It's so wild, eh? Such an amazing film.
Well, and Arwen's role there. Arwen is the symbol of his anima. Mm-hmm. She is his anima. And so in terms of the psychology of kingship, that a man cannot be a king, capital K king, until he has integrated and has a conscious relationship with his own inner feminine, his inner queen, because it's the anima in a man that is the guide to his soul. And in that scene where Aragorn is tending the sword, the broken sword, that is a castration wound. And that is particularly what's been happening to men since the 1960s. Men have been gradually feminized, castrated, and demeaned and demonized, really. Now to the point where, men are celebrated for, supposedly becoming women, cutting off their genitals.
It's the eunuch. It's the return of the eunuch.
Yes.
Right? Those priests, that priest class, it's so weird how things manifest at different times. Like, it's like now that's the modern version of it, but they have the same traits that happen. It's so interesting. It could be 1,000 years ago and it would have been something very similar.
Well, and I don't know how many thousands of years ago, or hundred, no, it would have been thousands, because there was this whole the mythology of the men who did castrate themselves to serve the goddess or something like that. Anyway, it is in the myths.
When they were the chosen priests to watch over the harems of the kings and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So,
and of course, in war, they would castrate the men, because you can't have them fornicating and bringing forth other, beings that would challenge the rule and order, or impregnating their own women.
Yeah, so even kings that would happen to, right? So they didn't have new lines rise up in the future.
Well, in the scene there where Aragorn is doing the equivalent of tending the castration wound, and then Arwen, his anima, comes in and says to him, "You will face the same evil and you will defeat it." That's what the inner queen does for a man.
It's that Hyros Gamos, right? It's the unification of opposites. Right? It's so amazing too. Like, we'll have to do, I got some screenshots. I'm not prepared to do an in-depth analysis of Lord of the Rings right now. But we'll have to do it, because the way he's putting that sword up and she's kind of wanders in the background.
Right.
It's
very dreamlike.
It's so dreamlike. It's absolutely amazing. I was just going through that the other day when I was preparing for this, and I thought, oh wow, like we have to do a more in-depth analysis of the films, I think, and like the scenes by scene. You could probably spend a half an hour just on one scene.
Oh, probably.
Maybe more.
It would be great if we could use actual clips from the films, but I don't think copyright BS allows that.
No, it's fair use. You can use them.
In film clips?
You can use film clips.
Really?
It's under a fair use thing if we're doing it for educational purposes.
Wow.
Yeah, so like, Michael Tessarian's documentaries, he has clips from films and stuff in that as well. David Whitehead and stuff. So if they can do it, I can do it.
Well, when I put the first video out, my videos, we had it on YouTube, and it was down in 30 minutes.
Wow. That's like, I think you were like targeted.
Well, it's the whole copyright thing.
Okay.
So apparently they have bots. They're out there, lurking around, just waiting for, some copyrighted scene. And a lot of it actually is the music.
Right.
So,
I know music is tough to put into your videos because of copyright stuff.
So if there's music playing in the scene, even
Right.
if you're allowed to show the scene,
Hmm.
they come after you because of the music.
That's
Yeah, you can't use
interesting.
this music because when Chris was, doing the video production, um, he had to, move around that, and some of the music is not the actual original from the
Right.
films, but other people, you know, playing the music, and
Right.
somehow that was okay. I don't know. I mean, it's so insane that
Yeah, I think if you
the
put
whole
a fair
concept.
use thing at the beginning, it should be fine, but I'm not sure.
Well, I mean, since you're not doing this on YouTube, so
Well, I do a YouTube and a Rumble as a
oh, do you?
backup. Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So,
So it might be worth a try. I just wouldn't want to get you, censored
oh my
for
God.
doing something like that. But it would be great. I mean, I'd love that.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure there's a way around it. It might be the music that hits you off, and you can put a disclaimer at the beginning, but we'll see.
Mm-hmm. Anyway, Luke,
Awesome.
I'm going to have to wrap it up pretty
That's
quick, but this has been fantastic. I
great.
really enjoyed this.
Well, I just wanted to do, because there's so many avenues we can kind of go down, I just
Yeah.
wanted to have a nice overview of your work,
Mm-hmm.
which I think we did here today. We got a lot of background information and touched on
Yeah.
a little bit subjects, but in the future, if we want to focus in more on a
Mm-hmm.
certain subject, as you've kind of done in the past, or even
Mm-hmm.
movie by movie or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
we can do
Mm-hmm.
a couple on the first movie and move
Yeah.
on from there.
Sure. Love it.
Awesome. Hey, so I got one more quote
Okay.
to end
Let's
this
do it.
off, and this came up. I'm reading this book, Man's Search for Meaning, by
Oh,
Viktor
yeah.
Frankl, and I was like
Mm.
right at the last, like maybe 10 pages. And when we were talking the other day, you kept bringing up this, this meaning. Like there's people have lost the
Yeah.
meaning in life.
Yeah.
And you brought up that a few times, and the first sentence I read when I was reading this book the other day was this quote, which I think you will enjoy. Let's see if I
Mm.
can do this properly this time. Aha.
There we
Every
go.
age has its own collective neurosis, and
Oh,
every
yeah.
age needs its own psychotherapy to cope with it.
Wow.
The existential vacuum, which is the mass neurosis of the present time, can be described as a private and personal form of nihilism. For
Yeah.
nihilism can be defined as the contention that being has no meaning.
Oh, wow.
Isn't that
Beautiful.
awesome?
Yeah. Fantastic.
Yeah, it's like that nihilistic philosophy is just there is no meaning in life. There is no meaning to being, and that's where a lot
Yeah.
of people, I think, are at. And they're
Yeah.
checking it, and that's why they're checking out early. And
Yeah.
there's so much despair. Like, obviously, it's pretty tough times,
Yeah.
but
But if you don't have, like, we can suffer incredibly if we know there is meaning to our suffering, but suffering without meaning is unbearable.
mm-hmm. It reminded me of Frodo a little bit.
Mm.
It's like he's
Hmm.
going through that, and there's a purpose for it, right?
Yeah. Hmm.
Not meaningless suffering, which is odd. People like, so with this whole pandemic thing that we've been going through, it's like
Hmm.
it gave meaning to people who had no meaning before. So now
Hmm.
they're like, oh, I'll do this because I'm suffering for everyone else. It like gave this
Uh-huh.
pseudo meaning to their life. You
Yeah.
know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
It's so
Hmm.
crazy. But
Well, and maybe I can finish off with a couple of quotes about myth and why should myths be important? That's actually a question to put out. Why should we even care about myth stories and fairy tales? And who cares? Nice little stories for your kids, but they're not relevant to our adult life. Well, I would say that's not true. And so would, of course, Carl Jung and Joseph Campbell and Tolkien himself. So here's a quote from Tolkien. I'm sure you've heard. He says, I believe that legends and myths are largely made of truths, and indeed present aspects of it that can only be received in this mode. And long ago, certain truths and modes of this kind were discovered and must always reappear. How about that?
It's awesome. Absolutely.
And here's another one from Rick Tarnas. This one is beautiful. Myth is the secret opening through which the inexhaustible energies of the cosmos pour forth into human cultural manifestation. And
Awesome.
finally, another one from John Lash. Myth is a product of the human imagination. What is recorded in myth can be something that actually happened, or purely archetypal and imaginary, and everything in between.
Wow.
So
We'll have to turn those into nice slides.
Yeah.
Or future videos.
Mm-hmm.
I think
all right, Luke, should we wrap it up then?
We should wrap it up. We've gone over time here, so.
All right. Well, this has just been wonderful. Thank you so much to
Thanks.
you for inviting me, and to all your listeners. And may we all be blessed, and may the light Erendil be with us all.
I really appreciate you coming on. Thanks so much, Loralee. I'm just so happy this happened so soon, and can't wait to do more with you.
Yeah, likewise.
Okay. See you, everybody.
Okay.
Take care.
Bye for now.